It's time to turn this roughed out blank into a beautiful salad bowl. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today I'm going to take this roughed out bowl blank, which has been once turned and dried, and I'm going to turn this into a beautiful salad bowl, hopefully. I think that's the goal at least. So what I've got here is black cherry. This has been turned quite a while ago. I don't have the date on here, although I really should have put the date on here because it's good to know that. I know this has been in my dryer for over a year. I'm pretty confident it's stabilized or equalized so that we're not going to see much movement after the second turning. And that's what we're doing here, is going to be this what's called twice turning. If you want to know more about how to handle green wood, check out my treatable Understanding Green Wood online course. You can check out all the details for that course over at my website, turnawoodbowl.com. For today's video, we're going to be doing what's called a twice turn, and that's what you need to know. So I'm going to go ahead and get this mounted to the lathe. Now, the way I'm going to mount this to the lathe is to use a jam chuck, or I'm basically just going to use pressure from the tailstock to hold this in place. Now, you could use a plate like this. This is a thick piece of plywood with a face plate, and I've got a piece of carpet padding on here, and this will help support the rim of the bowl. Now, I typically use this for smaller bowls, and the reason I use that for smaller bowls is because the shape of a smaller piece of wood doesn't distort as much as a larger piece of wood. Now, when you get into the larger bowls like this, and this one hasn't moved a ton, but what'll happen is the pith, well, it looks like the pith rises up, but actually the pith stays in its location in orientation to all of the grain of the wood, and the sides will contract as they dry. So the sides will kind of drop down. So we'll get this peak in the center because of the ingrain areas, and that peak can be somewhat substantial. And if we were to press that against a jam chuck like this with just carpet padding on that, we still might have some unevenness. So when I do larger bowls like this, what I'll do is I'll use a jam chuck that I picked up the idea from Glenn Lucas, and it looks more like this. And what I'm doing here is essentially there's a void in the middle, and we have two padded sides. And what'll happen is that peaked area of the rim will sit down into this void, and it will allow the two sides to rest firmly and not wobble around. So in some of the more dramatic woods where there is a lot of distortion on that first turning, you will see that it will fit really well into a piece like this. And this is essentially two pieces of plywood. The second top piece of plywood has the center cut out of it, and it's been glued together. And again, it has a faceplate attached to it like that. And I've used a piece of rubber mat material and glued that directly to the surface of that. So we have a good firm contact with the bowl rim to the lathe. So with all that explained, I'm going to go ahead and get this mounted to the lathe, and we're going to get started on finishing up this bowl. Okay, so I'm going to mount the jam chuck. I call it a jam chuck. It's a plate. I mean, you can call it a variety of different things. But I'm going to mount this to the lathe, and then I'm going to position the bowl so that the higher ingrain portion is in that little void channel in the center. There you can see the pith area. Now this bowl isn't as exaggerated as some can be. Sometimes that pith area is really, really pronounced. The nice thing about doing this twice turning with a tenon is I can line up that pin or that little hole from the previous time that this was connected to the tailstock, as you saw right there. Okay, so since this is dried and distorted, everything has moved. So I need to reshape the tenon. And I'm going to use my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge to take down the high spots on the side of this tenon. It's a little tricky getting this cut started because we're working right on the edge of the corner here. Now I'm going to make the face of the tenon nice and flush. Now remember, all of this these surfaces have moved and distorted. So there's a high and low spot on the face of this tenon. So I'm just going to go ahead and clean that up right now. Just a very light push cut across the face of the tenon. And I'll do the same with the shoulder. Okay, now I'm going to come in with my spindle detail gouge. Now I need to start right at the edge of this corner. That's not an easy place to start. Basically, you want to make sure that your bevel is at a 90-degree angle to the contact area. And you want to make sure you clean out that little recessed area in the center. Okay, so with the tenon and the shoulder reestablished, I can start refining the exterior of this bowl. Now, if you apply pressure with your bowl gouge into the bowl gouge will be riding those high and low spots, and you're going to get all kinds of vibration and noise and not a smooth cut. Instead, what you want to do is you want to apply down pressure with your left hand into the tool rest so that the bowl is forced to be cut as you pass. You don't want to let the bowl control the direction of your tool. Instead, you want to control the tool in its location. Okay, I'm using a scraping shear cut. This is kind of like a combination between a shear cut but more aggressive. I'm kind of opened up. I'm using the bottom wing of the bowl gouge and I'm scraping that area from the shoulder up. I need to refine and make this shape pretty well and complete at this point, because once I reverse this bowl into the chuck, it's going to be difficult to get down into this area. So this area of the bowl is the most critical while I have the bowl oriented like I do right now. So I'm going to take my time, I'm going to clean up that shoulder, and I'm going to shape the bottom curve of this bowl very precisely. And as you know, as I like to say, the exterior of the bowl is the bowl. Here you can see the profile a little bit better. There's a couple little high spots in there that need to be taken out. If you see my chin there, you see the chin on the face shield tilting up. What you're seeing there is I'm looking at the top of the bowl just like you are right now. And I'm looking at that shape. I'm looking across the bowl at the top on the opposite side to make sure that I'm actually changing that shape. Dry wood, especially nice hardwood like this black cherry, will wear down your tool pretty quickly. So you want to take a moment to sharpen your tool and keep it sharp during this whole process. I'll probably sharpen my bowl gouges 2 or 3, maybe 4 times during this turning. Dry wood, especially hardwood, is going to create a lot more friction and dulls your tools much quicker. If you want to know about sharpening, check out my course online. Okay, so now back to the bowl gouge. I'm going to use the shear scrape to clean up the rough spots. You can see the rough spots on the bottom of this bowl. The shear scrape that I'm using right now is a refining move that helps smooth out that surface. So you want to take your time and smooth it out nice, and you'll get nice small shavings like that if you're doing it right. Okay, so the bottom portion of the exterior of the bowl looks pretty good. Now I need to keep moving up the side of the bowl. Between the lights and the video, you can see the oscillation between the high spots and the low spots there. I'm not seeing that at the lathe because it's, to my eye, it's turning much quicker. Okay, so I have the surface all down to a certain level. Now this side is going to be exposed when I reverse the bowl, so I'm going to go ahead and reverse the bowl now. So I'll take the bowl blank off the jam chuck, and then we'll get this out of the way and bring the 4-jaw chuck in. You want to make sure that your tenon seats on top of and inside your dovetails. Okay, now there you can see the thin spot from the side and the high spot from the end grain. Thin, high, thin. That's what we were dealing with, and that's part of the reason why we used that initial plate as the jam chuck. So I'm going to work this material off. Instead of going from left to right, I'm going to go from right to left for two purposes. I don't want to tear out this grain, but I also want to make this a closed bowl. Now I'm going to use the bottom side of this bowl gouge to take the top of the rim down to level. This is going to remove that top area. And now we have a nice flush top portion of the bowl. I'm going to continue making cuts from right to left. Now, this is a supported grain cut. I've got a video all about supported grain. If you're not quite understanding that yet, you really want to check out that video. This is a supported cut, even though it's the opposite direction of the previous cut. A closed bowl is going to have the highest or the widest part of the bowl is on the outside of the bowl, not the rim. Here you can see the rim will be narrower than the widest part of the bowl. That is a closed shape for the bowl. And I'm making passes that allow the initial part of the cut is thick, and then it thins out or feathers off as I get up to the high spot. Now I'm using a scraping cut to shape that. You can see the top edge of the bowl and the shape and the curve. I'm taking that high spot down so I have a nice fluid curve all the way around. You still see there's a high spot there. You can see now as I'm taking that down. And again, this is exactly what I'm looking at, except from the opposite side. I'm not looking at my tool. I'm looking at the top of the bowl and the curve, and I'm taking my time to make that just right. All right, that's looking good. Now I need to feather the portion that I just did into the bottom of the bowl. And I'm doing that again with a combination of scraping cuts and shear scrape. The more I drop that handle, the more it becomes a shear scrape. You check out the video that I have on the shear scrape, because it's a really valuable technique to use in bowl turning. What's nice is it refines and removes just a small amount. Now I'm dropping the bowl gouge or the handle, so that I'm making a really refined, smooth shave here. It's just a really nice way to clean up very subtle areas. When you first start turning, it's real common to want to just make another cut and try to make each cut perfectly smooth. The odds of making a continuous cut perfectly smooth and in exactly the location you want is very poor. However, using the shear scrape, you can come back in here and refine any little areas that are causing trouble. Okay, so now with the exterior of the bowl cleaned up, I can start working on the interior. And here you can see that deforming that was happening. I've got that thin area on the side and the thick area on the end grain. I'm going to establish the rim, and I like to have the rim angled down into the bowl just a bit. That's just a personal preference that I have. Okay, so now I'm going to position the 1/2 inch bowl gouge at 90 degrees and start a cut into the side of the bowl. And what I'm looking to do with this bowl is I want the rim to be relatively wide, but I want the thickness of the wall to start getting thinner underneath that rim. I want a thicker rim so that the bowl is sturdy and it's durable. It'll be able to handle daily use and a little bit of abuse. If I make the top of the rim really skinny or thin, it's going to become delicate and relatively fragile. If somehow the bowl's dropped, it will most likely break at the rim if it's really thin. Instead, I'll have a thick rim here, and you can see I'm undercutting to get down into and under that rim to make the walls thinner. The biggest secret with doing this is to take your time and keep feeling that wall thickness and make sure it's where you want it to be. Now, I thought I had the rim angled inward to where I like, but I want to take that angle down just a touch there. Okay, now you can see I'm reaching all the way across the lathe to make this cut. And again, the bowl gouge is at 90 degrees. And I'm going to make this scoop cut underneath the rim. Now this particular cut is pretty easy to do with the 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, and that's why I like using this bowl gouge. If you have something at 40 or 45 degrees, it may be more difficult to get in there and wrap around that. You might need to use a different tool to get underneath that rim. Now I'm working the walls down just like I do all my bowls, and this is one of the reasons why I like that technique of working the walls down first. Is it's the only way you can do a twice turn bowl, is you have to work the walls down. Again, stop and check the thickness. You always want that wall to be a little bit thicker than what you need, right up until you've made it the right thickness and made it an even wall thickness. So in other words, what I'm doing here is I'm sneaking up on that wall thickness. You don't want to get too aggressive with those passes at the wall. If you get too aggressive and you go beyond the previous thickness and you get a thinner area, well, there's not much you can do at that point. So I'm making light cuts and just slowly removing material until I sneak up on that wall thickness. And I'll stop and I'll check on it. Right now I want that wall to be thicker than it needs to be, and it is. That's good. So I can feel there's my thickness and it gets thicker. So I need to take more material out of there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rub the heel of the bowl gouge and come back. Again, I'm sneaking up on this. I'm not getting aggressive here. I'm making very light cuts. These cuts are like 1 millimeter deep at the most. And what I was getting at is when you do a twice turning, you're kind of forced to do work on the wall thickness. For instance, I wouldn't be clearing out the middle of this and then working up the walls. Instead, I want to establish that rim and then work down the walls. And that's just the technique I use all the time. That's my personal preference. Okay, again, I'm sneaking up on this, and that's looking pretty close. Ideally, that wall thickness right there should be thicker than what I need, so I still have some passes to make. And it is just a bit thicker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back up and I'm going to merge all of these cuts together with one thin pass. And then I'll check again. It's looking good, except I'm feeling a high spot right there. The best way to deal with high spots is to mark them. Take a pencil and mark that high spot. Sometimes when you get the lathe running, it's difficult to know where that is. And now what I want to do is I want to start in front of and then feather out after I pass through that high spot. I'm going to take that high spot down and then feather out. And then I'll do one more pass to bring that whole area down just a touch. And I'll merge that all together. And then I'll check it again. Okay, now there's still something right there. So I'll mark it. It's basically the previous area merging into the new area I just made. But because the wall thickness is still a little thicker than what I need, I have material to work with here. And you can see how light that cut is. I just feathered it out, just took that little bit of high spot off. That's all you need to do. It's just like a shave. And an area that subtle is not easy to sand out. It's better to make a nice pass and cut it. Okay, I'm switching over to my J tool rest so I can get a little more support deeper into the bowl. I'll put a link to this tool rest in the description below this video, along with all of the other equipment I'm using in this video. do me a favor, if you're liking this video, click that like button. I know I say it all the time, you guys hear me say it, but what happens is YouTube's algorithm basically says, oh, there's a lot of people liking this, so they'll recommend this video to other people, and it helps this video, it helps my channel, it helps everything out. Thank you. I appreciate you for helping out and being very supportive of this channel. It helps me a lot. In case you were wondering, yeah, I'm pretty much doing this full time, so every little bit of support that I can get from you helps, and obviously if you're subscribing too, that helps. And you know, occasionally I get some super thanks in the comments below, and that's where YouTube allows you to make a donation, which is pretty cool. And I'm not asking you to do that. I'm just wanting to say thanks to the people that have done that, and that's really helpful, and I appreciate that. So thank you for all your support. Thanks for watching the videos. Thanks for being participants in my online courses, and thanks for all of that. I really appreciate it. Without you guys, I wouldn't be able to do these videos and be able to provide this much material. Okay, so I'm going back to my sharpening station. And this, especially when you get down to the last cuts on either the outside or the inside of the bowl, that's your last opportunity to make a nice smooth surface. So you really want to go back and freshen up the cutting edge of the bowl gouge right before you make those last couple passes. And we're looking really close here. I'm just going to make a really thin pass. I might be able to do this in one shot. Now this is where you do, again, you're sneaking up on it. Do a real light pass. You always want the bottom of the inside of the bottom of the bowl to be just subtly concave. You don't want a little dimple at the bottom, but you want it to be downward, and you don't want it to be flat. And that's right where I needed it. So that worked out really good. Okay, so now I'm going to sand it up. The other thing that's really nice with black cherry is it sands beautifully. You can almost get it. I feel sometimes some of the black cherry, and it does depend. It depends on how dry the wood is or where it's come from, but some of it feels like porcelain when it's sanded really well and it has a good finish on it. So I'll take my time and sand this whole piece. If you're curious about how I deal with dust, I've got a video all about that. You might want to check that out. I'm wearing my respirator right now, and that's critical. You really want to keep a respirator on, especially with these fine particulates. Now, this dust, this real fine dust, is the dust that can cause long-term problems. Okay, so I stop the lathe when I sand the center of the bowl. If you want to know about sanding bowls, guess what? Yeah, I got a video all about that too, so you can check that out if you're interested. Just basically take your time. Sanding is important, but it doesn't have to be laborious and take a long time. You can sand relatively quickly and get very good results. Then I'll do the exterior, the rim, and the interior. Now I work through grits from 180 to 240 to 320 to 400 grit. Basically 50% increments. Now this rim has relatively sharp edges. I want to ease those edges, but I'm not going to do that with the first grits that are more coarse. I'm going to do this with the 240 grit. And the reason I'm doing that is the 240 will not remove a lot of material. It'll just take that corner off a little bit so it's not sharp, but it won't start changing the shape of that rim very much. So I just clean up the rim and ease over those edges with the 240 grit as I'm moving through the different grits. And then I went through the 320 and the 400. Now I'm going to use tried and true original finish. This is linseed oil and beeswax, and if you've watched me for more than a video or two, you know I use this all the time. I'm not paid by Tried and True, but I probably should be. I need to call these guys. Anyway, it's a very good product. It's all natural. It's food safe. There's no additives. There's no metals, metal dryers. There's nothing in it. I've got a video all about it if you want to check it out. I've found it to be a great product to use on all my food use bowls, especially salad bowls. It works very well. So the way we do this, I'm putting a very thin coat on. I've basically had this little piece of cloth in the oil, and I squeegeed out the excess, and I'm using just that amount that was on the cloth to do the entire exterior of this bowl. You don't need to be putting on a thick layer. As a matter of fact, if you put on a thick layer, you're going to have problems. A thick layer is going to dry unevenly and get gummy. You really don't want that. If you can see finish on the wood, you have enough there. That's kind of the rule of thumb that the manufacturer recommends. So it goes on a little bit shiny, but it will soak in and it'll become more of a luster after it's dry. So I'm working the surface of the interior. I want to make sure everything's coated. And the way this works is I'm going to let it set up for an hour. Then I'm going to wipe off any excess areas with a clean cloth. And then we're going to let it set overnight. And that gives it enough time to set up, and it's ready to be burnished. So with this application on, we're going to go ahead and let this rest overnight. And I'm going to leave it on the lathe, and you're going to see why I leave it on the lathe in just a second. You can see that the finish has dulled a bit. It went into that luster that I was telling you about. It's not quite as shiny. And now I'm going to use 4/0 or 0000 steel wool with the lathe running, and I'm going to burnish this surface. And this is going to even out any remaining high spots in the finish, and it's going to give it a shine and a luster. It's just a really, really nice finish. It's just a simple application. You can see I'm just running this over the surface and just letting the steel wool do the work. You can pull the steel wool apart and use a new area of it. Also, this is a great example of the twice turn. You can see how smoothly that's turning still. This is 24 hours later. If this were a green wood bowl and I left it on the lathe for 24 hours, you would see all kinds of wobbling going on because of the distortion of the wood drying overnight. So just take your time and burnish it all, and that's it. The finish is complete. Now I'm going to work the tenon area and finish the foot of the bowl. And now I can use my flat jam chuck. And the reason I'm using this is the rim is even and balanced now, unlike the way it was initially. The great thing about using the tenon is this entire time I'm using the same exact connection point right there where the tailstock lines up. So I don't have to do much in the way of realigning this. It's lined up based on that pinpoint. So using my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel bowl gouge, I will remove the tenon. Now what I'm doing here is that on this particular bowl, I'm going to leave the shoulder is going to become the foot of this bowl. If I wanted to make this a little bit more ornate or decorative, I could make a smaller foot, and I could have used that tenon as part of the foot. Could have been a smaller, taller foot. But that's not quite as functional as a salad bowl, and a salad bowl pretty much needs to be functional. So we need a base that's wide enough and sturdy enough that the bowl isn't going to fall over every time it gets wobbled or used. So I've cleaned up the base of the foot, and now I'm removing the tenon. And what I want is the bottom of the foot, I want it to be concave. And basically I need the wall thickness of the bowl to continue through the foot of this. So essentially the foot of the bowl is almost like a ring that's been attached to the base of the bowl. Just take your time and make light cuts here. You don't want to get aggressive and get a catch because it could throw this piece off, and we don't want that. So I'm going to clean that foot up, and now I'm going to do a concave cut into the center. Whoops, before I do that, I'm going to clean up the edge of this. Now, one of the things I love about these bowls is I love to be able to hold them with one hand, especially my popcorn bowl. And I've decided, it took me a few bowls to figure this out, but there's a size that's ideal to hold in my hand, and it's about this size. However, my fingertips are always running around the edge of that. So if I don't have a good clean outer edge of the foot, it just feels weird. So I'm taking my time and cleaning up that outer edge of the foot so it's nice and refined. Now I'll make that concave cut for the inside of the foot. Again, very light cuts here. You do not want to have a catch at this point. The only thing really holding this bowl is the live center attached to the tailstock that you see there in the bottom of the screen, and the pressure that's applied to that. When you're doing push cuts into the headstock here, that's the best way to do it because you're applying pressure in towards the lathe and is less likely to skip the bowl off the lathe itself. And again, we're just sneaking up on that thickness. And from my point of view where I'm turning, I'm looking down on that rim and I'm making sure that the area that I'm working is lower than the rim or the foot of the bowl. Because if it's higher, well then obviously the bowl is going to wobble on that center point. So I want to make sure the middle of this is reduced and deeper than the foot of the bowl. So I'm using my spindle detail gouge here to further reduce that nub at the center and then finish up the curve of the bottom of the bowl. And before I completely remove that, I'm going to use a little sandpaper and clean up the foot area. You can see how the outside of the foot has been cleaned up. It's a little more crisp than it was before. Okay, so now we can remove this from the lathe, or remove the nub from the bowl, then remove it from the lathe. If you're not comfortable at this point of doing this, you can basically cut that off and then sand that area in the center. I'm going to be sanding it anyway. What you do is you basically move in and apply a little bit of pressure while you turn the lathe off. Now it didn't quite cut there. All you need to do is push forward with the spindle detail gouge and then hand rotate the piece, and that little bit of nub will come right off. Okay, so now I need to sand that area and get the bottom of the bowl finished up. And I'm just using the edge of the sanding pad here to clean up the center of that. One of the things I like to do is make sure that I rotate this around and sand it from both sides so that I don't create a rut on one side. All right, it's looking pretty good. Now I'll use my wood burning tool to go ahead and sign the bottom of the bowl. This is a chisel tip. I like signing with the chisel tip. It's a little difficult to get used to, and it's a little tricky for making turns. I like the straight, clean line that it provides. Does take a little more time. There are pen tools that are more designed and more akin to writing instruments. I've just found that I like the chisel a lot. Okay, so I'm going to come back in with a little bit of the tried and true original finish. Now that I have a big container of this and I keep just a small amount in the jar, and that's prevents me from having to go back and open that larger container over and over again and potentially spoiling the larger amount of finish that I have. So this little jar that you see is just temporary. I put a small amount in there that actually lasts for quite a while. And then I will hand buff the bottom of this. Tomorrow, after this is cured, I will just hand wipe this with the steel wool and clean it up. So there is the black cherry salad bowl. From that ugly original once turned bowl, inside there was this gorgeous finished salad bowl. I always love twice turnings because of that. It's just like, you look at those once turned bowls and think, this isn't going to look like much, but then you get something as beautiful as this. Love turning black cherry. So here's the final bowl. Look at that. This black cherry is just an absolutely gorgeous wood to be turning into beautiful salad bowls like this. And I love doing a tenon because it allows me to have a nice foot on the bottom of the bowl. I know a lot of people have asked me, why don't I do a mortise or a recess in the bottom of the bowls? And this is one of the reasons, is I love to have this foot and I love to be able to shape this foot. I can basically resize this at the last minute to make it smaller or leave it large if I want to. I'm going to do a video all about the tenon and the mortise coming up soon, so pay attention for that. And I'll explain in more detail why I use the tenon versus the mortise and the recess. Now, I do use a mortise and recess occasionally, but not that often. Usually it's a tenon. But all in all, I think this has turned out to be a really nice bowl. The twice turning is the way to go. If you want a nice straight rim that's going to stay like that for a long period of time, you really need to twice turn it. And you can learn more about that in my Treat a Bowl online course if you'd like. But essentially, twice turning is the way to go for a nice round bowl. All right, guys, well, leave me a comment below and let me know what you think of this bowl and if you've turned something similar to this. And if you haven't already, please click that like button below the screen. Thank you. And subscribe if you're not already subscribing. I've put a ton of work into this channel and I hope you're subscribing. That's all I'm asking. Subscribe and hit that like button for every video. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. And as always, until next time, happy turning.